Hey folks, now I must be the last photography YouTuber to talk about the Sony a7R5. Sorry about that. Unfortunately, I didn't get early access or even late access to it, so I'll sit here with my tape measure, field tool, and notes that I've made, and we can pretend that this is some kind of a camera. No shade, I've shot with all of the A7R cameras since they first came out back in 2013. Can you believe it's been that long? The A7 and the A7R were first announced 9 years ago. And they're objectively great cameras that have been getting better and better in each generation. Now, I don't personally choose to shoot with Sony cameras anymore, but that is subjective. There's just a couple of things that don't work for me personally, but they are phenomenal cameras. And the A7R4 was already so great, there were just a couple of areas that heavy users would report back were lacking, and this new camera really seems to have picked them up. Now, we can all, myself included, get tied up in the specs race and wanting bigger resolution, higher ISO, more focus points, big headline capturing specification jumps. And when they come, it's great and it's exciting. This is not one of those updates, however. When we went from the A7R to the 2, there was a big jump. 2 to 3, not much of a jump, but it was still full of really important updates, and the 3 was undoubtedly a better camera than the 2 despite sharing a sensor. Then the 3 to the 4, another big jump, and now the 4 to the 5. Not such a headline kind of change, but there's 10 reasons why I think this is probably Sony's best ever camera to date. I would say definitely their best portrait camera to date, but there's 5 reasons why I think it maybe isn't perfect and why it won't be the best for very long. Now, just a quick recap on prices. It's actually been longer between the 4 and the 5 than any of the other generations, and the biggest price difference. So just as a little history lesson, I'll put down here the inflation adjusted prices. But 2013, the original came out, it was $2,300 US. Bargain. Then in 2015, the Mark II, that was $3,200, huge jump. In 2017, the Mark III, no jump in price, same, $3,200. So inflationary wise, it was actually a reduction in price. 2019, the 4 came out, $3,500, and now 2022, the 5's come out and it's $3,900. So again, on paper, a big jump being $400 compared to 3 before that and none before that. But in terms of inflation wise, it's not been a huge jump in any case. Now, let me run through the 10 reasons why I think this may be the best portrait camera that they've ever released. And keeping in mind, it's all incremental and it's come over time. First one would have to be the inclusion of CF Express A. Now, if people were familiar with shooting, and I'll pair this one up with the new processor, which is vastly improved. The reason I put that one at number 1 is a lot of heavy users found that the time it took to process, the time it buffered and would lock up after you'd taken a series of images was unacceptable, and it really made doing wildlife shooting a little bit challenging, especially compared to cameras that had CF Express A or B cards in them. Now, I would still rather see it rocking a CF Express B. Even things like the Fuji X2H series have them, so it's not relegated only to big flagship cameras like a Nikon Z9. The Z7 also has it, and it's in the same kind of category as this camera. They're twice as fast and higher capacity, but still, an A gives you much better write times than any of the SD cards. That's going to significantly help with that workflow perspective in the field and when you're backing up. Next up, finally have a lossless compressed RAW. Great to see. Now, it's not available when you're shooting at the top speed. I guess it takes more processing power, and the new processor still doesn't have headroom for that. But that's great for people who want to shoot compressed but want it to be lossless. Now, it seems, thanks to the things that I pointed out before, that the buffer is nearly limitless and it will clear reasonably, a lot quicker than it would have with SD. Next, it's gotten the 9.44 million dot EVF from the A1, which is class leading. There are some things that I would rather have seen go in than that, but that's certainly great to see. Now, before I finish out the rest of the pros list, I wanted to remind you guys, if you didn't see it, I did a video. They aren't sponsoring this video, but I want you to see it anyway. I did a video earlier this week on the Happy Travel Tripod. It's currently up on Kickstarter. It's sincerely incredibly good. I think it's the best carbon fiber travel tripod I've ever used, and it's literally less than half the price of the one that I have been traveling with for the past several years, and it's better. Apart from having a much better center column, so instead of just having a single column, you've got these 3 points of contact. It's got loads of features. It's got the spiked feet that you can swing around, the ball head, and the whole thing will take 25 kilos of weight. It's got its own proprietary quick release system, but it is Arca Swiss compatible. Everything's bubble leveled and ratcheted and really nicely made. And this center column is actually a second tripod. So you can use it as a tabletop tripod, or you can invert it to get right above looking along the ground. It's also niftily got a little cell phone holder in there that if you never want to use it, you don't have to, but it's there if you need it at some occasion. And there's some points up here that link back to needing a good tripod. So kind of an awkward segue, but whatever. It's $100 off on Kickstarter. You can check that out in the description below. Next up, the IBIS, they're claiming 8 stops of compensation. Now, I know IBIS isn't sexy and people don't go on about it in the same way they do about resolution or frames per second or dynamic range, but if you're shooting portraits and if you're shooting with a high-res camera, effective IBIS is so important. On one hand, yes, it's really cool to be able to get a half a second or a 1 second long exposure handheld generally, but still it can take those shots from being sharp to unbelievably sharp. Sometimes, you're shooting a bird and you get 5 in a row and all of them are acceptable, but one of them is just God level crisp. That's where IBIS can really make a difference. Getting every single pore and hair perfectly sharp and locked down, even when you're at a decent hand-holding speed, IBIS is great at that. So I haven't had a chance to test it, but if it is giving you the real 8 stops, that's pretty incredible, and it would be class leading. Next up, the autofocus. Now, this is the headline that you've probably have seen, using AI processor. That's able to not only detect face and eye and head, but also body and body parts. So it can tell where you are and which direction you're facing, where your eye would be behind sunglasses and all of those kind of things. And then the AI processor is able to develop itself over time rather than having to wait for a firmware update that's been supplied to it. So that potentially could be really cool. This is, of course, first generation technology. I'm sure other brands are going to come out with it in future, but if it does intelligently learn the kind of things you shoot and get better and better at it, that's incredible. I do think for that to be really effective, it's going to need an incredibly powerful processor with loads of headroom, and if it can't already do compressed lossless RAW at top speed, I really wonder if the processor is fully able to keep up with that. So they're calling that RealTime Recognition autofocus, which will do beyond the usual real-time autofocus. It's doing more different subjects and that kind of thing. Whether you're a fan of fixed down screens or tilt screens or flippy screens, there are times where they're really helpful, and if they're well executed, they don't, naturally, compared to a fixed one, there is introducing some potential weak point to the camera because you could catch it on something, but this new one has a tilt and flip screen, which looks really great and is best of both worlds for photographers standing behind it, for people on gimbals that need it off to the side, or for people shooting themselves who want to be able to look back at it, like I am right now. That really gives you the best of all worlds. Then the 2 things that I was going to say you really do want a great quality tripod for. This is doing multi-shot pixel shift shooting with 16 shots. So off that sensor, it's now able to yield a 240 megapixel image. Now, it has been the case that getting one that will actually stitch and there's been no movement is almost impossible. They're saying that there's some new software that's going to allow for small amounts of movement and take it into account and still give you sharp in the other areas, but it's not in camera. You have to do that afterwards in Sony's somewhat clunky Edge software, but let's see how that works out. And the other is focus stacking. So to be able to tell it you want to start at a foot away and then photograph to 2 foot away and put 20-shot increments in between there. Again, great, but again, not able to do it in camera, and you want a great tripod for that. So that would be my first of the negatives, is that it's not able to do both of those things in camera. And the fact that it can't do them and it can't do lossless compressed RAW at the top speed really does make me wonder how much headroom there is in processor still on this camera. It seems like they're still at the absolute limit of what they're able to do. If it's helping with the buffer, that's a great thing. Hopefully the AI processor is fully self-contained and looks after itself, because the main processor doesn't seem to have excess capacity. Other negatives. I really think this being high res, going to be used by a lot of portrait photographers, why not put the A1 shutter in there rather than putting the A1's EVF in, or preferably putting both. But this one is, the sensor is one of the slowest readout sensors on the market. Not casting shade, it just is what it is. You can get phenomenal results with it. But the A1 shutter, allowing you to get up to 1/400th sync speed, would have a great advantage for folks. And with the slower readout time, you're not going to be wanting to use electronic shutter. Having the best mechanical shutter in there possible, I think being their flagship high-res camera would have been a strong move to make. It still can't process RAW files in camera. Again, another what's going on with the processor. The stacking, as I mentioned, isn't in camera. And finally, and this is 100% subjective, I appreciate that, is the ergonomics and menus. The menus seem to have just gotten deeper. Now I saw something about the new autofocus adds like 20 new menu items across a couple of different levels throughout it. Coming from other manufacturers is always difficult. Moving to a different one, it's always going to be a challenge, but I just overall find the Sony layout incredibly cumbersome, but it is rich in detail. So there's so many levels there. If, taking it to the farthest extreme, looking at like the Hasselblad X2D that I've been shooting with recently, it's such a shallow menu and you get to everything within top level or one level down, but it has 5% of the options. So the A series cameras are really computers with an image sensor in them, like I know all digital cameras are, whereas something like an X2D with a much more simplified system is really more focused on, you have your exposure variables, now go shoot, rather than having all of these different digital aids to help you get the best and the easiest results that you possibly can. No shade, it's just, for me, the ergonomics, they're now like the A7 IV, so it's better for someone with a big hand. Certainly there's been a big development and I think improvement in the A7R line of cameras over the years. But for me, it's still, if I'm comparing it against the Canon or the Nikon alternatives, my least favorite of the ergonomics. I appreciate for some of you it may be completely the opposite. Check out, there's a link below where you can actually get your pre-order in for the A7R5. I know I'm 2 weeks late on all of this. Don't forget to check out the HP travel tripod. It's really, honestly, so good. I got it in to test and give my 100% unbiased and kind of honest opinions, pros and cons. I'll pop a card above where you can see that video. And I'm so impressed by it. I actually bought 2 for our productions when we're on the road. It's going to be a great addition to the kit. So check that out. If you have any questions, let me know. If you have other thoughts, any other reasons why this is or isn't the ultimate portrait camera from Sony, let me know that as well. And I'll see you soon.